Do it. I bet you won't. The words were half lost in the music and rooftop chatter, tossed out like a joke, like a line that would dissolve into the night air and be forgotten by morning. But to Mark, they landed with the weight of a challenge he hadn't realized he'd been circling for months. The company had rented out the rooftop lounge of a downtown hotel to celebrate closing a major deal. String lights zigzagged overhead, swaying slightly in the cool evening breeze. The city below glittered, headlights streaming like glowing veins through dark streets, office windows shining in tall glass towers. Laughter rose and fell in waves, blending with the steady thump of bass from a speaker someone had insisted on bringing. For atmosphere. Mark stood near the edge, one hand wrapped around the sweating glass of soda he'd been nursing for the last 20 minutes. He wasn't much of a drinker anymore. Early mornings and school lunches had replaced late nights and hangovers years ago. He hadn't even planned to come. But his sister had called that afternoon. Drop Lily off. She wants a sleepover. I want to spoil her. You look tired. She'd said it in that tone that wasn't a suggestion. So for the first Friday night in months, Mark had found himself with no bedtime stories to read, no tiny voice asking for one more glass of water, no stuffed dinosaur to retrieve from under the couch. The silence of his apartment had felt too loud. So he'd put on the only blazer he owned, run a hand through his hair, and told himself it wouldn't hurt to show his face for an hour. Now here he was, watching coworkers transform from spreadsheet warriors into louder, looser versions of themselves. Ties had come off. Heels were abandoned near chairs. Someone from marketing was trying to convince two interns that karaoke was a team-building exercise. Mark smiled faintly, but stayed where he was, close enough to seem social, far enough to leave easily. That's when Jake appeared at his side, already on his second beer if the bottle in his hand was any indication. You look like a substitute teacher at prom, Jake said, bumping his shoulder lightly. Live a little. I am living, Mark replied. I came, didn't I? Physically. Mentally, you're still at home alphabetizing juice boxes. Mark huffed a quiet laugh. They're already alphabetized. Jake stared at him. That was a joke. Yeah, Mark said, eyes drifting back over the crowd. I know. Jake followed his gaze and smirked almost immediately. Ah. There it is. There what is? That look. I don't have a look. You do. It's the same one you get every Monday morning at exactly 9:03 a.m. Mark's stomach tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. Jake leaned on the railing beside him, lowering his voice. Elena. Mark didn't respond, which was response enough. Across the rooftop, near the bar set up under a canopy, Elena Rossi stood with a small group from HR. She wore a deep blue dress instead of her usual tailored suits, her dark hair down over her shoulders. She wasn't the loudest person in any room, never had been, but people leaned in when she spoke. Even now, in a casual setting, she carried herself with that same quiet authority, shoulders relaxed, posture straight, eyes attentive. She laughed at something someone said, a real laugh, not the polite work one. It softened her whole face. Mark looked away quickly, like he'd been caught staring at the sun. Jake grinned. You've had a crush on our boss for 2 years. I have not. Mark. I respect her. Mem. You also respect the way you volunteer for every presentation she attends. That's called being prepared. That's called ironing your shirt twice. Mark opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. Jake took a swig of his beer. You know what would be legendary? Mark sighed. Why do I feel like I'm about to hate this sentence? You finally making a move? Mark actually choked on his drink. Are you out of your mind? Jake laughed. Come on. You're single. She's single. You two have more eye contact in meetings than most married couples. She's my boss. Off the clock tonight. That's not how power dynamics work, Mark muttered. Jake rolled his eyes. You think she's fragile? She runs a department of 50 people and scares the legal team. I think she can handle a conversation. Mark risked another glance in Elena's direction. As if pulled by something he couldn't see, her gaze lifted at the same moment. Their eyes met across the rooftop. It wasn't dramatic. No music swelled. No one else noticed. But she didn't look surprised. She didn't look away. Her expression shifted, just slightly, into something almost curious. Warm. Like she'd been expecting him to look eventually. Mark's pulse stumbled. He looked down fast, focusing on the condensation sliding down his glass. Jake saw everything. Oh no, that was mutual. Don't even pretend you didn't feel that. It was nothing. That was not nothing. That was a whole email thread. Mark let out a slow breath. Even if I wanted to, which I'm not saying I do, I wouldn't know what to say. Try high. Classic. Works for millions. Mark shook his head. My life is complicated. Jake's tone softened a notch. Because of Lily? Mark nodded. He loved his daughter more than anything in the world. But being a single dad meant every decision had weight. Every new person was a potential shift in her small, carefully balanced universe. Dating apps had been deleted after 2 half-hearted attempts. Late-night texts went unanswered. It was easier to keep things simple. Predictable. Safe. You're allowed to have a life too, Jake said quietly. Mark stared out over the city. I wouldn't even know where to fit one. Jake nudged him again. Maybe start with a conversation. 5 minutes. No future planning. No wedding invitations. Just talk. Mark hesitated. The music changed to something slower, background instead of centerpiece. A few people drifted toward the makeshift dance floor. Others gathered in smaller circles, voices blending into a warm hum. Elena was no longer with the HR group. She stood alone now, scrolling briefly through her phone before slipping it into her clutch. She looked thoughtful. A little apart from the party, just like he felt. Jake followed his gaze again and grinned. I dare you. Mark groaned. We're not 12. Maybe not. But you've been stuck in responsible adult mode for so long you forgot how to take a single emotional risk. Mark said nothing. I dare you to go talk to her. Jake continued. Not as your boss. Not as your manager. Just as a man who clearly thinks she's amazing and is too scared to say it. I am not scared. Jake raised an eyebrow. Mark exhaled. I am cautious. Caution is just fear in a business suit. Mark huffed a reluctant laugh, but his chest felt tight. And if I make things weird? Then you're 2 mature adults who handle it like professionals on Monday. The world does not implode. Spreadsheet's still spreadsheet. Mark looked at Elena again. This time, she wasn't looking at him. She was watching the city skyline, hands resting lightly on the railing, wind moving gently through her hair. She looked peaceful. Alone in a crowd. Something in his chest shifted. For years, he told himself admiration from a distance was harmless. Safer. That wanting something didn't mean you had to reach for it. But standing there, with the city buzzing below and music drifting through cool night air, he felt the weight of how small he'd made his world. Work. Home. Groceries. Repeat. When was the last time he'd done something uncertain? Something that didn't come with a schedule and a backup plan? Jake clapped a hand on his shoulder. Go. Before I go over there and tell her you alphabetized juice boxes. Mark shot him a look. You wouldn't. Try me. Mark looked down at his drink, then set it carefully on a nearby table. His palms were already sweating. This is a terrible idea, he muttered. Jake grinned. The best ones usually are. Mark took 1 step forward. Then another. Each step felt louder than the music, heavier than it should. He adjusted his blazer like armor, ran a hand through his hair, immediately regretted it, and kept walking before he could turn back. Halfway across the rooftop, someone called his name, but he waved vaguely without stopping. Elena sensed him before he spoke. She turned slightly, eyes meeting his with that same calm awareness. Up close, the city lights reflected faintly in her gaze. Mark, she said like his name had been waiting on her tongue. Hi. His rehearsed lines vanished. Hi. He managed, a little breathless, a little stunned that he'd actually made it there. And somewhere behind him, Jake pumped a silent fist in victory.